The alien princess married a quiet human diplomat. The fleet already knew his name, HFY Sci-Fi. The assignment came through on a Tuesday. Not a Monday, which would have felt appropriately dramatic. Not a Friday, which might have suggested someone was rushing. A Tuesday, the kind of day the United Earth Diplomatic Corps preferred for decisions they wanted to look routine. Ambassador-designate Marcus Hale read the posting twice. Then he set his coffee down and read it a third time. Galveth First Delegation. Neutral Station Perihelion 7. Duration, open-ended. Classification, Tier 1 Contact Protocol. Tier 1. There were only 3 Tier 1 contact classifications in the entire UEDC charter, and 2 of them had never been used. The third had been used once, 14 years ago, during the Shirkai incident, an event that most of the public still believed was a satellite malfunction over the Pacific. Marcus had been a junior attaché during the Shirkai incident. He had not slept for 11 days. He was 43 years old now, gray at the temples, with a habit of speaking slowly and a reputation for saying less than his counterparts expected. He had served in conflict mediation across 4 continents and 2 off-world stations. His file described him as methodical, non-reactive, and difficult to provoke. His former supervisor had once written in a private evaluation that Marcus was never meant to see. Hale is the kind of man who makes the other side feel like they've already lost before he opens his mouth, not because he's intimidating but because he seems to have already considered every outcome they haven't. He had considered this outcome. Not this specifically, but something like it. The Galveth were not new. Humanity had known about them for 6 years. Known in the way you know about a storm system forming 3,000 kilometers offshore. You track it. You model it. You prepare contingencies. You hope the models are right. They were a multi-planetary civilization, that much was confirmed. Their territory encompassed what human astronomers had designated the Veth Cluster. 11 star systems, 4 of which showed confirmed habitation signatures. Their ships had been observed twice at the outer edge of the solar system. Both times they had held position for exactly 72 hours, then withdrawn without communication. The first contact overture had come 8 months ago. Not from the Galveth government, from a commercial courier vessel that flagged a UEDC relay buoy and transmitted a single encoded packet. The packet, once decrypted, contained 3 things: a set of coordinates for Perihelion 7, a proposed meeting window, and a name. Marcus Hale. That was the part no one had explained to him yet. His briefing officer, a compact, precise woman named Dr. Ewan who ran the xenolinguistics team, had been careful about it during their pre-deployment session. She had told him the name had appeared in the transmission without context. No explanation, no title. Just the name, spelled out in phonetic Galveth script alongside its human language transliteration. "Do you have any prior contact with Galveth individuals or vessels?" she had asked. "No," he had said. "Any indirect involvement in operations that may have intersected with Galveth space?" He had paused. "Not that I've been cleared to know about." Dr. Ewan had written something down. She had not told him what. The briefing packet he received afterward was thorough. 47 pages on Galveth physiology, communication patterns, known cultural hierarchy markers, and behavioral observations drawn from the 2 perimeter events. There was a supplemental appendix on their fleet composition. Not full, nothing was full when it came to the Galveth, but enough to understand the scale. Humanity had 12 active deep space vessels. The Galveth cluster fleet, based on long-range spectral analysis, maintained somewhere between 60 and 200 warships, depending on how you classified the mid-tonnage hulls. The analysts couldn't agree on the exact number. They could agree that it was not a number humanity was prepared to argue with directly. That was context Marcus was supposed to hold somewhere in his mind without letting it change the way he moved through a room. He was good at that. He packed light. A standard diplomatic carry, 3 changes of clothes, his reference materials on a hardened drive, a photograph of his daughter that he kept not for sentimentality but because it reminded him what patience actually looked like in practice. She was 7 in the photo, waiting at a train station, completely calm in the way young children sometimes are when they understand that arrival is inevitable and rushing accomplishes nothing. He had been thinking about that photograph a great deal lately. Perihelion 7 was a neutral station, technically, a decommissioned mining platform in the outer belt that the UEDC had refitted for exactly this kind of meeting. It had been ready for 2 years. Everyone had assumed it would sit empty for another decade. The funding for its maintenance had been argued over 4 consecutive budget cycles. When the Galveth transmission arrived, it turned out someone had been right to keep paying for it. The transit to Perihelion 7 took 9 days by standard courier ship. Marcus spent 6 of them reading everything in the briefing packet. He spent 2 of them reading between the lines of the briefing packet. The things the language chose not to say, the gaps in the physiological profiles, the careful vagueness in the fleet appendix that suggested the analysts knew more than they had been authorized to include. On the 9th day, as the station came into view through the forward viewport, his escort officer, a young UEDC security attaché named Petrov who had been visibly nervous for most of the trip, came to stand beside him. "Ambassador," Petrov said, "can I ask you something?" "You can ask. Does it bother you that they asked for you by name? That we don't know how they have it?" Marcus watched perihelion 7 grow in the viewport. It was small against the dark. Everything out here was small against the dark. "It bothers me less than the alternative," he said. "What's the alternative?" "That they asked for someone else and we sent me anyway." He picked up his jacket from the seat beside him. "At least this way they're expecting me." Petrov didn't laugh. Marcus hadn't intended it as a joke. The docking clamps engaged 20 minutes later. The station's internal lights were on. Someone had made sure of that, small gesture, good instinct. The airlock cycled. The corridor beyond was empty and quiet and smelled faintly of recycled air and machine oil. Somewhere on the other side of this station, representatives of a civilization with a fleet that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built were sitting in a room, waiting. They had asked for him specifically. He intended to find out why. He straightened his jacket, nodded once to Petrov and walked through the airlock. The Galveth were taller than the briefing materials had suggested. That was the first thing Marcus registered, not their coloring, which was a deep bronze gray that caught the station's fluorescent lighting in ways human skin didn't, not the bioluminescent striping along their forearms that the xenobiology notes had described clinically as secondary chromatic signaling tissue, but the height. The lead delegate stood at nearly 2.5 meters. The 2 figures flanking her were slightly shorter. All 3 moved with a deliberateness that Marcus recognized instinctively, the kind of controlled, measured movement that came not from stiffness but from long practice at projecting calm. He recognized it because he had been told his entire career that he moved the same way. The meeting chamber was modest. The UEDC design team had been careful about that. No grandeur, nothing that could be read as either dominance or submission. A circular table, chairs scaled for both physiologies to the best of their knowledge, soft lighting, no flags. Flags had been debated extensively and ultimately left out. The reasoning was sound. If you didn't know what the other party's flag symbolized, you couldn't know whether displaying yours was a greeting or a provocation. Marcus had agreed with that decision when he'd read it in the prep notes. He agreed with it more now, standing in the room. The lead delegate, he had been given no names in advance, another deliberate gap in the briefing, regarded him for a long moment before speaking. Her translator collar, a device that looked like it had been engineered with significantly more sophistication than humanity's equivalent, produced sound in a register that was almost human. Not quite. The consonants had a precision that felt architectural. "You are Marcus Hale," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am," he said. "We requested you." "I know. I was hoping you could tell me why." Pause. The 2 flanking figures remained perfectly still. The lead delegate tilted her head. The briefing notes had flagged this gesture as potentially meaning attentiveness, curiosity, or assessment, they weren't sure which, and then said something that Marcus had not anticipated in any of his 9 days of preparation. "We know what you did at HFY." The room was very quiet. Marcus kept his breathing even. He kept his expression neutral. He had 14 years of practice at this particular discipline, and he used all of it in the 3 seconds before he responded. "HFY was a complex situation," he said carefully. "It was a situation," the delegate said, "in which the instinct of every other human present was to escalate, and you chose a different approach. We observed." That word, observed, landed with a weight that Marcus filed away immediately for analysis later. They had been watching the HFY event. Which meant they had been watching 14 years ago. Which meant the 2 perimeter events that humanity knew about were not the beginning of Galveth interest in the solar system. They were just the first time the Galveth had decided to be visible. "You've been monitoring us for some time," Marcus said. "We monitor all emerging spacefaring civilizations," the delegate said. The word she used, or the word the translator rendered, was emerging. Not lesser. Not primitive. Emerging. It is standard practice. Most do not reach the point of requiring direct contact. What changes the calculus? She looked at him steadily. When a civilization produces individuals whose judgment we believe would survive translation. Marcus let that sit for a moment. He thought about the photograph of his daughter at the train station. You're not here to negotiate boundaries, he said. Not initially. Then what are you here to negotiate? The lead delegate glanced briefly at the figure to her right, a communication he suspected rather than uncertainty, and then returned her gaze to him. There is a situation developing in the outer reaches of our cluster, she said. A situation that will, within approximately 4 of your years, affect this system as well. We came to determine whether humanity should be warned, assisted, or, she paused, simply observed. And the determination depends on me. The determination depends on whether your kind produces enough people like you to matter. She folded her hands on the table. Long fingers, 4 of them on each hand, the joints slightly different from human anatomy. You were the most convincing evidence we had found. So we asked for you. Marcus was quiet for a moment. What's the situation in the outer cluster? He asked. That, she said, is the second conversation. The first is whether you are willing to have it honestly. He looked at her. He thought about what it meant that a civilization with 60 to 200 warships, conservatively estimated, had come to a decommissioned mining platform to ask one human being a question about honesty. I'm willing, he said. But I should tell you up front, I'll need to share what you tell me with my government. We know. And I can't guarantee their response. We know that as well. Something shifted in her expression. Not a smile, the musculature was different, but something in the same register. That uncertainty is part of why we're here. If your government's response were predictable, we would not have needed to meet. Marcus reached for the water glass in front of him, a deliberate, unhurried movement, and took a slow drink. Then let's have the first conversation, he said, and see where it goes. The lead delegate's bioluminescent striping brightened slightly along her forearms. The briefing notes had not covered what that meant. He made a mental note to ask Dr. Yuan. Outside the viewport behind the Galveth delegation in the cold dark of the outer belt, the running lights of a Galveth vessel were visible. Barely, just a handful of points that didn't quite match the star field. One vessel. They had brought one vessel. That told Marcus something. He wasn't sure yet what, but he stored it carefully and kept listening. Her name, she told him on the second day, was Velshera. She offered it without ceremony, partway through what had become an unexpectedly extended working session. The kind of meeting that starts as a formal exchange and gradually loses its scaffolding as both parties realized the scaffolding was slowing things down. The translator rendered her name in 2 syllables that felt clean and direct. She seemed to register his acknowledgement of it with that same slight brightening of the forearm striping. He told her she could call him Marcus. She tried it once, carefully, and then continued calling him Hale. He didn't correct her. What Velshera told him over the course of those 2 days required Marcus to rebuild several assumptions he had held about the shape of the galaxy. The Galveth were not, as humanities analysts had assumed, the dominant power in their region of space. They were significant, established, stable, militarily capable, but the Veth cluster existed at the edge of a much larger geopolitical structure that humanity had no name for yet. Velshera used a term that the translator rendered as the compact, and she described it with the careful precision of someone explaining a concept they knew would require reframing. The compact was old. Centuries old in human reckoning, possibly longer. It was not an empire in any sense humanity would recognize. No single governing authority, no unified military command. It was closer to a set of understandings, enforced by mutual interest and, when necessary, by collective action. Member civilizations maintained sovereignty. They also maintained obligations. The Galveth were members. Junior members, Velshera said, with the straightforwardness Marcus was beginning to appreciate about her. Humanity was not a member. Humanity had not been considered for membership. This was not hostility, it was the same position every young spacefaring species held until it demonstrated sufficient stability and judgment to be worth the risk of incorporation. What kind of risk? Marcus asked. New civilizations are unpredictable, Velshera said. They carry old conflicts into new spaces. They expand without considering what they are expanding into. They misread silence as permission. That's a fair characterization of some of our history, Marcus said. It is a fair characterization of every species' early spacefaring period, she said. Including ours. He filed that away as well. The situation in the outer cluster, she explained, involved a species called, in translator approximation, the Vrakkel. They were not compact members. They had been assessed for membership twice and declined twice, on grounds that Velshera described carefully without editorializing. They operated in a region of space that the compact had designated as a buffer zone, not claimed, not governed, but monitored. For approximately 6 years, Vrackel activity in the buffer zone had been escalating. Not toward compact space, toward the outer spiral, toward younger systems, toward what Velshera described as unincorporated territory. Toward, among other things, humanity's solar system. They don't know we're here, Marcus said. They know something is here, Velshera said. Your electromagnetic emissions have been detectable at significant range for over a century. The Vrackel have been tracking the source. They have not yet determined it is inhabited. How long before they do? At their current survey pace, approximately 4 years. Possibly less. Marcus was quiet. He was doing the math that any reasonable person in his position would do, and he didn't like the answer. And when they determine it's inhabited? He asked. That depends on what they find when they look, Velshera said. The Vrackel are not aggressive by default. They are acquisitive. They assess and they calculate. If they find a civilization that appears ungoverned, unaffiliated, and unprepared, they calculate whether it's worth the cost, Marcus finished. Yes. And if they find a civilization that appears to have relationships with established powers? Velshera's forearm striping brightened again. They recalculate. Marcus leaned back slightly. He had been in enough negotiations to understand what was and wasn't being said in the space between sentences. You're not just warning us, he said. You're offering something. We are exploring whether an offer is appropriate, she said carefully. That determination is not mine alone to make. But I am authorized to have this conversation. Authorized by whom? By the individuals in my government who believe that a humanity which is warned and given time to prepare is a more useful neighbor than a humanity that is not. She met his eyes directly, another gesture the briefing notes had not adequately explained, but which felt, in context, like a deliberate signal. And by the individuals who read what you did at HFY and decided you were the correct person to hear this first. What did I do at HFY? He asked. Not defensively, genuinely. He knew his own version of events. He wanted hers. You de-escalated a situation in which every tactical model predicted escalation, she said. The vessel that entered your system was damaged. Its crew was attempting to signal distress using military protocols, the only protocols they had available. Every human response unit interpreted those signals as hostile. Except you. I had a linguist on my team who caught the frequency pattern, Marcus said. You listened to your linguist, Velshera said. When everyone else had already decided the answer. He didn't have a response to that. She didn't seem to require one. The Vrackel situation, he said, returning to the present. What does preparation look like? From your perspective. It looks like humanity knowing what is coming, she said. It looks like humanity making decisions, about visibility, about posture, about relationships, with full information rather than none. What those decisions are is not our concern. We do not govern you. We are telling you what we know because we believe informed neighbors are better than uninformed ones. And because a humanity that survives the Vrackel assessment becomes a potential future compact member, Marcus said. Pause. That conversation, she said, is several conversations from now. But it's on the table. Many things, Velshera said, are on the table. Marcus looked at the diplomatic recording device on his side of the table, running as agreed with both parties' consent. Everything being said was going back to UEDC command. He was aware of that. She was aware of that. They had both agreed to it as a condition of the meeting, which was itself a kind of statement about the nature of the trust being constructed here. I need to transmit a summary to my government, he said. They'll have questions. We anticipated this, Velshera said. We have set a 72-hour window before the next session. Is that sufficient? He thought about what UEDC command would do with 72 hours and the information he was about to send them. He thought about the phone calls, the emergency sessions, the chain of people above his clearance level who would suddenly become very interested in a Tuesday appointment on a mining platform in the outer belt. It'll have to be, he said. The message Marcus sent to UEDC command was 11 pages. He wrote it himself, without assistance, which was unusual enough that his escort officer Petrov noticed and didn't comment on it. The writing took 4 hours. The thinking behind the writing had taken most of the previous night. He had learned, over a career spent carrying difficult information between difficult people, that the way a message was structured determined whether it was received as a problem or a briefing. A problem triggered defensive responses. A briefing triggered questions. He needed UEDC command asking questions, not building walls. The first 3 pages were factual. Who he had met, what they had confirmed about themselves, the translator data, the physical descriptions, the environmental conditions of the meeting. Dry, precise, verifiable. The kind of information that established credibility before he asked anyone to believe something harder. Pages 4 through 7 covered the compact. He was careful here, careful to present it as information received rather than information assessed. He had opinions about the compact. He was not ready to transmit them. His job was to deliver the message clearly enough that the people with broader authority could form their own. Pages 8 and 9 covered the Vrackel situation. This was where the writing had taken the longest. He had drafted it 6 times. The first 3 drafts had, in retrospect, been too alarming, the kind of language that produces panic responses in people who are not accustomed to sitting with uncertainty. The final version presented the timeline, the mechanism, the level of Galveth confidence in their estimates, and the specific nature of the risk without editorializing about what it meant for human civilization. He left that for page 10. Page 10 was his assessment. He marked it clearly as such because his job was not to make policy, it was to observe and recommend. His recommendation was this: the Galveth delegation should be treated as a credible contact, the Vrackel timeline should be taken seriously as a planning constraint, and the implicit offer contained in Velshera's framing deserved formal exploration. He noted that the offer, if it was an offer, came with no explicit conditions attached, which was either genuine or was the most sophisticated opening position he had encountered in 20 years of negotiation. He noted that he was inclined, provisionally, to believe it was genuine. Page 11 was a single paragraph. It read, "I want to be transparent about one thing. I am operating with the awareness that the Galveth requested me specifically and provided no explanation that fully accounts for their knowledge of my involvement in the Shirkai event. I do not believe this is a manipulation. Their account is internally consistent and the information they've shared is operationally significant in ways that wouldn't benefit a deception. But I want my government to hold this variable. I am doing so myself." He read it once more. Then he sent it. The response came in 41 hours. Not 72. 41. That told him something. The response was brief, 6 lines, marked at a classification level Marcus technically held but had never before received active communications at. It acknowledged receipt of his transmission. It confirmed that the information was being reviewed at the highest relevant levels. It instructed him to continue the dialogue. It told him that a secondary team was being assembled and would be at perihelion 7 within 8 days. And then, in the 5th line, it said, "Ambassador Hale, you are hereby granted full discretionary authority for the conduct of this dialogue until the secondary team's arrival. Decisions made within this window are considered authorized at the executive level." Marcus read that line 3 times. Full discretionary authority. Executive level authorization. Retroactive. He had been a diplomat for 20 years. He had never been given full discretionary authority for anything. Most of the time, the architecture of diplomatic instruction was designed specifically to prevent any single person from having it. UEDC command was either very confident in him or they were putting him on a wire above a very large drop and trusting him not to look down. He suspected both were true simultaneously. Petrov came in while he was reading it, saw his expression and stopped in the doorway. "Good news or bad news?" Petrov asked. "Yes," Marcus said. He spent the remaining hours before the next session preparing carefully. He reviewed everything Velshera had told him, organized by what he knew, what he inferred, and what he didn't yet have enough data to assess. He thought about the single Galveth vessel visible through the viewport, still there, he checked twice, and what it meant that they had come with one ship to a meeting that concerned the security of a solar system. It could mean restraint. It could mean confidence. It could mean they had others nearby that they'd chosen not to show. He thought it was probably the second one. Civilizations that needed to display their strength usually did. The ones that didn't were the ones who didn't feel they had anything to prove. He wasn't certain. But he had learned to work with uncertainty the way a navigator worked with dead reckoning. You committed to your best calculation and you adjusted when new information arrived. You didn't wait for certainty before moving. Certainty was a luxury that serious situations rarely provided. What he was certain about was this. Whatever was happening in the outer cluster, whatever the Vrackel were building toward, humanity's position in this moment was defined entirely by whether the next few conversations went well. Not the next few years. The next few conversations. He slept for 4 hours, a habit, not a luxury, and walked back to the meeting chamber at the agreed time. Velshera was already there. So was a 4th individual Marcus hadn't seen before. Smaller than the others, seated to one side, with the specific quality of stillness that Marcus associated in humans with people who observed professionally rather than participated. He noted it. He didn't ask yet. "Your government received your report?" Velshera said. It was not a question either. They did, he said. Faster than I expected. We thought they might. Her forearm striping was steady, no brightening. Neutral or whatever neutral meant for her. Hell. There is something I should tell you before we continue. All right. The individual with us today is not part of the diplomatic delegation, she said. She is here because of a separate matter that intersects with this one. I wanted to be transparent about that before she was introduced. Pause. Her name is Valkyra. She is my daughter. Marcus looked at Valkyra. She looked back at him with an expression that, even across the considerable barrier of species difference, registered clearly as someone who had been waiting a long time for this meeting and was not yet certain it was going to go the way they needed it to. What's the separate matter? He asked. Velshera straightened slightly in her chair. She has requested, she said carefully, to be assigned to the Human Liaison Office. Permanently. As the first Galveth diplomatic resident in your system. Another pause, more deliberate. And she has also submitted, through proper Galveth channels, a formal declaration of, she consulted something, a tablet of some kind, what your translation protocols render as bond commitment to a specific human individual. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Is the individual in question aware of this? He asked. No, Velshera said. You are the first human to be informed. The individual in question is a member of your secondary team. He thought about the secondary team being assembled right now, 8 days out. Who? He asked. Velshera told him. Marcus leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to process, short enough not to appear rattled, and then looked back at the 2 Galveth women sitting across the table from him. Well, he said. That's a different kind of negotiation. The secondary team arrived on a Friday. There were 7 of them, 2 additional career diplomats, a xenobiologist, a signals analyst, a security liaison, a medic, and 1 individual whom the manifest listed as Cultural Integration Specialist, First Contact Division, a title Marcus had not previously encountered in 20 years of UEDC service. His name was Dr. James Okafor. He was 38 years old. He had a background in comparative anthropology and xenolinguistics, spoke 6 human languages fluently and 2 more conversationally, and had spent the last 3 years working on a classification system for non-human social structures based on the limited observational data available from the Shirkai event and 2 other encounters that remained largely classified. His file, which Marcus had requested and received within hours of learning his name, described him as intellectually rigorous, interpersonally adaptive, and notably comfortable with ambiguity. His supervisor's note was more direct. Okafor doesn't get unsettled. He gets interested. This is either his greatest professional asset or the thing that will eventually get him into serious trouble. Marcus had read that and thought, probably both. He met the secondary team at the docking ring. Standard procedure. He shook hands, assessed faces. 7 people responding to the reality of being on a station where active first contact was underway, with varying degrees of visible effort at appearing calm. Okafor, he noticed, looked genuinely calm. Not performed calm. The real thing. He was taking in the station with the same attentiveness Marcus associated with people who actually wanted to understand where they were, not just catalog that they had arrived. Ambassador Hale, Okafor said, shaking his hand. Thank you for the briefing transmission. It was, he paused, seeming to choose between several words, clarifying. In what way? Marcus asked. It helped me understand why they sent me, Okafor said. He said it without ego, the way you'd say the map confirmed the route, and Marcus added it to his growing file of observations about this particular individual. He didn't tell Okafor anything yet. He walked the team through the station, gave them the operational briefing he'd prepared, factual, organized, focused on what they needed to function effectively. He covered the Galveth delegation's composition, the meeting structure, the communication protocols, the sensitivities he'd identified. He covered the compact situation and the Vrakel timeline with the same measured precision he'd used in his written report. He did not cover Valkyra. He was going to. He had thought carefully about how. But there was an order to this kind of thing, and the order mattered, and he had learned from Velshera's approach, the transparency about what was coming before the thing itself arrived, and he intended to apply it. After the briefing, as the team dispersed to their assigned quarters, he asked Okafor to stay. I need to tell you something, Marcus said. And I want to say up front that this is unusual. The situation is unusual. I'm not framing it as a problem. I'm framing it as information, which is what it is, and what you do with it is your choice. Okafor set down the pad he'd been holding and gave Marcus his full attention. All right. One of the Galveth delegation members has made a formal declaration of intent, Marcus said carefully. A cultural and legal declaration within their system. The rough translation is a bond commitment. It's not casual, from what Velshera has described to me, it's a serious thing, entered into deliberately. It's also, according to their diplomatic protocols, a matter of public record within their society as of the transmission that accompanied their arrival here. Okafor was quiet. The declaration, Marcus continued, names you. The room was very quiet for a moment. Marcus watched Okafor's face move through something, not shock, not the defensive blankness of someone shutting down, but the specific quality of concentrated processing that Marcus recognized as real thinking happening in real time. I've never met a Galveth individual, Okafor said finally. I know. How do they know me? The same way they knew me, Marcus said. Observation. Your work on the classification system is publicly available in academic databases. Your contributions to the Shirkai analysis, the parts that were eventually declassified, are in the literature. He paused. Velshera told me that Velkira has been following human scholarship in xenolinguistics and social structure for approximately 3 years. Which means she's been reading your work. Okafor looked at the table. She's read my dissertation, he said quietly. It was not quite a question. Almost certainly, Marcus said. My dissertation, Okafor said, argues that cross-species social bonding is not only possible but structurally inevitable when two civilizations maintain prolonged contact, and that human resistance to acknowledging this is a cultural artifact rather than a biological or behavioral reality. Marcus said nothing. He let it sit. Okafor looked up. You're telling me a member of an alien delegation has formally declared intent toward me based on reading a paper I wrote arguing that this was inevitable? Yes. A long pause. What are the diplomatic implications? Okafor asked. Marcus had expected several possible first questions. That one was not on the list. He found to his mild surprise that he respected it. Significant, Marcus said. And not entirely negative. A formal bond commitment in Galveth culture carries obligations of protection and loyalty that extend to the bond partner's community. There are scholars on the xenobiology team who will tell you that this is essentially a kinship mechanism applied across species lines. He paused. What it means in practical terms is that Velkira's declaration has already been registered with her government. The Galveth Fleet Command is aware of it. Okafor was very still. The fleet, he said slowly, knows my name. Yes, Marcus said. The implications of that settled into the room like a change in air pressure. Not explosive, not dramatic, but unmistakable. When do I meet her? Okafor asked. Tomorrow, Marcus said. If you want to. Okafor was quiet for a moment longer. Then, I want to. The meeting between James Okafor and Velkira lasted 4 hours. Marcus was not present for most of it. He had offered to be, as a professional courtesy, as a structural anchor for the encounter, and both parties had separately indicated, without coordinating, that they would prefer to conduct the initial conversation without an intermediary. He found this in itself informative. He spent those 4 hours in a working session with Velshera, covering the operational details of what a permanent Galveth diplomatic presence in the solar system would actually require. The logistics were significant. The legal framework didn't yet exist, on either side. The security implications were being processed by people on Earth who were simultaneously managing the psychological impact of learning that alien civilizations had been watching their solar system for at least 14 years. Velshera was precise and patient about the logistics. She had clearly prepared for this conversation over a long period. Every question Marcus raised had been anticipated. She had answers or she had a clear process for finding them. It was, Marcus reflected, the kind of negotiation that was only possible when both sides actually wanted the same outcome and the conversation was about construction rather than conflict. Velkira's declaration, he said at one point. Within the compact, how is it being received? Velshera was quiet for a moment. Carefully, she said finally. That covers a lot of ground. Yes. She folded her hands. The compact has precedent for interspecies diplomatic partnerships. It does not have precedent for a bond commitment across species lines. The distinction matters within our legal structure. She paused. There are individuals in the compact who view this as premature. Humanity has not been assessed. The relationship between your civilization and the compact is not yet defined. And yet you allowed the declaration to stand, Marcus said. Velkira is of age and of standing, Velshera said. Her right to make this declaration is not contingent on compact approval. We do not govern our people's personal commitments. A beat. We do, however, take note of what they indicate. What does this one indicate? That my daughter, Velshera said, has made a judgment about humanity's trajectory that I believe she has thought through more carefully than anyone who will question it. She looked at Marcus directly. She is very good at reading the shape of things. It is, among other attributes, why she reads extensively in xenolinguistics. Marcus thought about a young Galveth scholar sitting somewhere in the Veth cluster, reading a human dissertation about the inevitability of cross-species social bonding, and making a decision. She believes in what he wrote, Marcus said. She believes, Velshera said, that he was right. And she has decided to be part of the evidence. Pause. This is, in our culture, considered a form of intellectual courage. He thought about that for the rest of the session. When Okafor came back, he came back different. Not dramatically. Marcus didn't deal in dramatic changes, didn't trust them as indicators of anything real. But there was a quality of settled certainty about him that hadn't been there before. The way a calculation looks when it's been checked and confirmed. She's extraordinary, Okafor said simply. In what way? Marcus asked. She's been building a framework for human Galveth cultural interface for 3 years, Okafor said. Independently. Without any direct contact. Based purely on public scholarship and long-range observation data. He paused. And she's right about almost everything. The places where she's wrong are the places where she didn't have enough data about human variation, regional difference, generational difference. The structural analysis is sound. She'll want to know that, Marcus said. I told her, Okafor said. I also told her where she was wrong. She took notes. Marcus allowed himself a small moment of genuine warmth. How did she respond to the corrections? She said, Okafor paused, seeming to re-experience the moment. She said that inaccuracy in the presence of a primary source was an opportunity, not a failure, and she was grateful for the precision. That sounds like something you might write, Marcus said. Okafor looked at him. I know, he said quietly. That's what's complicated. The complicated part, Marcus understood, was this. A bond commitment in Galveth culture was not merely personal. It was structural. When Velkira had filed her declaration, she had done so through channels that were simultaneously cultural, legal, and diplomatic. Her declaration had been logged with the Galveth government. It had been transmitted to the relevant compact oversight bodies. It existed, now, as a formal record in the administrative architecture of a multi-civilization interstellar organization. Which meant that James Okafor, whose first act of professional relevance had been a classified note during the Shirkai event, and whose second had been a dissertation about cross-species bonding, was now a named individual in compact records. And the fleet command of the Galveth, which was itself accountable to the compact, now had a standing obligation, under their own legal code, to consider his welfare as an extension of Velkira's welfare. This was not, Marcus had concluded after extensive reflection, a leverage play. It was too structurally real to be a play. You didn't put your daughter's formal declaration into a permanent legal record as a diplomatic maneuver. Not even in a culture different from his own could he read it that way. But its consequences were real regardless of its intent. The Galveth fleet knew James Okafor's name. The compact knew that a Galveth citizen had made a formal bond commitment to a human. The Vrakkel, who were currently calculating whether humanity was worth the risk of engagement, would eventually learn that the nearest established fleet power had a vested personal interest in the welfare of a human diplomatic officer. The calculus of that, once it spread through whatever intelligence networks the outer cluster maintained, was not trivial. Marcus had thought about this for most of the previous night. Okafor, he said. I need you to understand something. Not as a colleague, as the person whose name is now in those records. I'm listening. This doesn't make you safe, Marcus said. It makes you significant. Those are different things. Significant draws attention. From the compact, from the Vrakkel, from people within Earth's government who will have opinions about this that have nothing to do with you personally. He paused. But it also means that whatever happens in the next 4 years, whatever the Vrakkel decide when they finish their survey, the calculation is no longer purely about an unaffiliated, unprotected civilization that no one has a stake in. Okafor was quiet for a long moment. You're saying her declaration changed the strategic picture, he said. I'm saying it complicated it, Marcus said. In ways that may ultimately be in humanity's favor. He met Okafor's eyes. She knew that when she filed it. I believe she filed it anyway because she meant it. But she knew. She told me, Okafor said simply. She was transparent about it. She said, he paused, she said that she was not willing to separate what she believed from what she chose. That a commitment that was only made when it cost nothing wasn't really a commitment. Marcus was quiet. She quoted your report, Okafor added. The Shirkai assessment. The line about de-escalation requiring someone willing to be wrong in front of everyone. Marcus had not published that report. It had been internal, classified, reviewed by a small number of people within UEDC. It had never been transmitted anywhere publicly. How does she have that line? He asked. Okafor looked at him steadily. She said they've had it for 14 years. The formal agreement was signed on the 22nd day. It was not a treaty in the traditional sense. No territorial provisions, no mutual defense clauses, no explicit trade framework. Those would come later if they came at all, and they would require processes that neither the UEDC nor the Galveth government could complete at a decommissioned mining station in the Outer Belt. What was signed was a framework document, a record of understanding, a statement of intent, and a set of agreed principles for the relationship between humanity and the Galveth going forward. Marcus had written the first draft. Velshera had revised it substantially. Marcus had revised her revision. They had done this 11 times over 4 days, and the final document bore the marks of that process. Precise language in some places, deliberately vague language in others, the careful architecture of two parties building something designed to survive contact with reality. He was proud of it. Not of his own contribution specifically, of the thing itself. The thing they had made together. The secondary team was present for the signing. So was Velkira, sitting beside Okafor at a slight angle that Marcus had noticed, they had unconsciously adopted throughout the past 2 weeks, present to each other in a way that was neither intrusive nor performative, simply the natural spatial grammar of people who had decided to trust each other. Velshera signed with an instrument that left a mark Marcus couldn't read, in a script that the briefing notes described as used only for legal documents of permanent standing. He signed with a standard diplomatic pen, on paper that would be digitized and transmitted to 12 different offices on Earth within the hour. Afterward, standing near the viewport while the rest of the room moved and talked, Velshera came to stand beside him. You are satisfied with the document? She asked. I'm satisfied with what it represents, Marcus said. The document is a framework. What matters is what's built on it. Yes. She looked out at the dark. The Galveth vessel was still there, the same single ship, unchanged. The Vrakel survey will reach definitive range in approximately 3 years and 8 months, she said. When it does, the information that your civilization has a relationship with a compact member will be available to them through normal intelligence channels. Will they act on it? They will recalculate, she said. As I told you at the beginning. Whether the recalculation favors engagement or avoidance, that depends on how the relationship develops. How visible your civilization becomes within the next several years. Whether there is evidence of stability. We're not a stable civilization by most definitions, Marcus said. You are stable enough, she said, with a directness that he had come to recognize as her version of reassurance. We would not be here otherwise. He thought about that. Velshera, he said. The line from my Shirkai report. The one Velkira quoted. How long have you had that document? She was quiet for a moment. Since it was written. How? The vessel in the Shirkai event, she said. Its crew survived. When they returned to their home space they submitted a report. That report included a complete record of all communications they had received during the event, including the internal UEDC communications they intercepted. Marcus absorbed this carefully. You've been reading our internal communications. We were reading them, she said. Past tense. We stopped 8 years ago when we determined that the surveillance was becoming counterproductive. She looked at him. We are telling you now because the framework we signed today includes a provision against covert information gathering. We could not sign it honestly without disclosing this. He thought about what he should feel about this. He thought about what the practical reality was. Did you share what you gathered with the Compact? The documents were shared with Compact oversight as part of our standard assessment reporting, she said. They are in the archive. So the Compact has 14 years of internal UEDC communications. Selected internal UEDC communications, she said carefully. The collection was focused on diplomatic and contact-related correspondence. We were not comprehensively monitoring your civilization. Pause. We were trying to understand whether you were ready to be approached. And, he said. You were not, she said. For approximately 12 years. The Shirkai event changed the assessment. You, specifically, changed the assessment. Marcus was quiet. Because I listened to my linguist, he said. Because when the data suggested one course of action and your judgment suggested another, you trusted your judgment and you were right, Velshera said. That is not a small thing. That is the kind of quality that civilizations either have enough of or they don't. He thought about the secondary team behind him, 7 people, one of whom had just had his name entered into compact records and the legal architecture of an interstellar civilization. He thought about the framework document, still drying, that would be transmitted in an hour to 12 offices on a planet that was, in this moment, still largely unaware of how much had changed in 22 days. What happens now? He asked. Now, Velshera said, your civilization has approximately 3 years and 8 months to become the kind of neighbor that the compact considers worth protecting. She paused. And we have the same amount of time to make the argument to the rest of the compact that you are worth protecting. That's a significant amount of work on both ends. Yes, she said. It is. Which is why we needed someone on your end who understood that working under time pressure and uncertainty was not the same as working without care. She looked at him directly. You understand this. I'm beginning to, he said. Behind them, Okafor was talking to Valkyra in the precise, measured way of 2 people who have found a shared language and are still learning its full vocabulary. The xenobiologist on the secondary team was asking one of the Galveth delegation members about atmospheric variance in the Veth cluster with the unguarded enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting their whole career for this conversation. Petrov, still nervous, was standing near the door with the particular expression of a person who had lived through something significant and would spend years deciding how to talk about it. The single Galveth vessel sat in the dark outside the viewport, quiet and steady, in the way of something that had been waiting for the outcome and had now received it. Marcus thought about the photograph of his daughter at the train station. The certainty that arrival was inevitable. The patience of waiting for it. He thought about what the next 3 years and 8 months would require, not from him specifically but from humanity broadly. The quiet work of becoming credible. The difficult work of building relationships when you didn't yet understand the full shape of what you were building. The more difficult work of preparing for a contact event that the public didn't yet know was coming, in a way that didn't produce the defensive responses that defensive information always produced. The Galveth had sent one ship. They had sent a diplomat and her daughter. They had signed a framework, not a treaty. They were moving carefully. Marcus intended to move carefully too. I'll need a permanent station assignment, he said to Velshera. If this is going to work, there needs to be continuity on both ends. Not me specifically, but an established presence. Someone at Perihelion 7 who knows the relationship and can maintain it. Agreed, she said. We will maintain Valkyra's designation as resident liaison. She has already requested the assignment formally. Okafor will likely request a corresponding designation on our side, Marcus said. We anticipated this, Velshera said. And then, with what Marcus had learned to identify as the Galveth equivalent of dry humor, we anticipated most of this. Except Valkyra's declaration, he said. Pause. No, she said. That we did not anticipate. Another pause, different in quality. We hoped for it. There is a distinction. Marcus looked at her. You hoped your daughter would find someone worth the declaration, he said. I hoped, Velshera said carefully, that when my daughter made her judgment, the subject of that judgment would prove her right. She looked back at the room. She has very rarely been wrong. But the stakes of this particular judgment were higher than most. And? Marcus said. Velshera watched her daughter explain something to Okafor, gesturing with a patience and precision that Marcus had seen in Velshera herself, the family resemblance carrying across physiology into something more structural. And, she said, the evidence so far is encouraging. Marcus accepted that. It was honest and measured, and it left room for the future to be what it would be rather than what anyone needed it to be. That was, he thought, the best possible foundation. He turned back to the viewport. The star field was unchanging, it always was, on the scale of human observation. But somewhere out in that dark, a Vrakkel survey vessel was moving through space toward a system it didn't yet know was inhabited, performing calculations that would eventually include variables that hadn't existed 22 days ago. The calculus was different now. Not safe. Not resolved. Not simple. Different. Marcus picked up the signing pen from where he'd left it on the ledge and turned it over in his hands once. A habit, not a gesture, and set it down again. 3 years and 8 months. It was enough time if used well. He intended to use it well.